Dear listeners, have you ever wondered where the absolute limit of your patience lies? As an emergency room physician, someone who lives right on the border between life and death, I always thought there was no pain I couldn't handle. But I was wrong. My breaking point shattered on one unforgettable night. I was working a late shift in the ER, fighting to save a patient's life near midnight, when two new traffic accident victims arrived. To my shock, it was my husband and my sister-in-law, a woman I genuinely cared for. Seeing them, I didn't cry or scream. I simply managed a cold smile that chilled me to the bone. And then I did something my in-laws still can't believe. That night, like any other on-call in the ER, the air was heavy with the smell of antiseptics, blood, and fear. The rhythmic beep of monitors, the hurried steps of nurses, and the groans of patients blended into a chaotic symphony of life and death. I had just finished suturing a complex wound. As I peeled off my blood-stained gloves, I was about to slip out for a breath of fresh air, but before I could cross the door, an ambulance siren blared urgently outside. "Dr. Calloway, we have a major traffic accident. 2 victims, a man and a woman, are incoming." A charge nurse named Chandra informed me, her voice tight with urgency. The exhaustion vanished instantly. I pulled my scrubs back on, quickly slipped on a new pair of gloves, and sprinted toward the ER entrance. This was our battleground, a place where there was no time for fatigue. 2 stretchers rolled in almost simultaneously. On the first lay a woman. Her long, dark hair was matted with blood, and her expensive-looking red silk dress was ripped in several places, exposing bloody abrasions on her arms and legs. She was unconscious, and her breathing was shallow. But what made me freeze wasn't her condition. It was the intense, seductive perfume wafting from her. It was Chanel No. 5, the very limited edition fragrance I'd had to special order just last month as a birthday gift for my sister-in-law, Zola Johnson. My heart felt like it plummeted to my stomach. I stepped closer and brushed the bloodied hair from her face. My God, it was Zola. I was frozen solid. But right then, the second stretcher arrived beside me. The man lying on it was in worse shape. A white, blood-soaked bandage was wrapped around his head. His designer shirt was torn, revealing a terrible bruise on his chest. His face was pale, but his features were unmistakable. The straight nose, the thin lips, the thick brows. How could I not recognize him? It was Cairo Johnson, my husband, the man I had shared my life with for the last 5 years. He had told me he had to meet with an important client out of state that night and would be back late. Now he was here, next to his own sister, both in a pitiful state from a late-night accident. Why? Why were they together? Zola's perfume, the strong scent of liquor radiating from Cairo, their disheveled clothes. Suddenly, all those pieces exploded in my mind, fitting into a truth so raw and brutal it stole my breath. So that was it. His important client was his delicate sister. Their all-night meeting had been a pleasant evening somewhere I knew nothing about. Pain and betrayal burned in my chest. I wanted to scream, to shake him awake, and demand an explanation. But I wasn't just Dr. Celine Calloway anymore. This was the emergency room. I looked at Zola's unconscious face, then at Cairo, who was groaning in pain, and without realizing it, a cold, icy smile crept onto my lips. It wasn't a smile of satisfaction, but the definitive realization of someone who has been fooled for too long. For the last 5 years, I had lived like a ghost in my own house. Working as an ER doctor, saving lives day and night, I barely received any attention from my own husband. He was always busy, he always had an excuse, and his biggest excuse was always Zola. Zola is still young. She lost her parents when she was a child, and she has a very fragile nature. If I don't look out for her, who will? He had told me countless times, and I believed him. I believed every word. I believed in the innocence of that big-eyed, tearful sister-in-law. I believed in my husband's kindness. I sacrificed my time, postponed appointments, and accepted dining alone to give him time to care for his poor sister. It turned out that his care was the kind given in a luxury hotel bed, paid for with the money I earned by the sweat of my brow. "Doctor, the female patient is showing signs of internal bleeding. Her blood pressure is plummeting." The nurse's voice pulled me back to reality. All eyes in the ER turned to me, awaiting my orders. I took a deep breath. The cold hospital air filled my lungs, extinguishing the fire of rage burning inside me. I saw these two people, the two who had betrayed me together, lying weakly on the brink of death, and I turned to my team. My voice was terrifyingly clear, cold, and professional. "Prep or two. We will take the female patient first. Her status is more critical. Give the male patient oxygen and IV fluids and take him straight to a head CT scan. I'll get to him later." With that, I turned and began pushing Zola's stretcher toward the operating room with my team, leaving Cairo behind under the perplexed stares of the nurses. They didn't understand. How could a wife be so calm seeing her husband in a serious condition? Why did I choose to save the other woman first? But only I understood. This wasn't a wife's choice. It was a doctor's decision. And more importantly, it was my silent declaration of war, my first act against those who had made a joke of my life. From today, I am rewriting your play. How will this incredible story continue? Will the husband and sister-in-law survive? And most importantly, what will Dr. Celine Calloway do next to claim her justice? Yes, if you, like us, are intrigued and on the edge of your seat, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of this drama. Every subscription is a huge support for us to continue creating good and meaningful stories. The heavy OR door closed, isolating me from the outside world and the sight of my husband, motionless on the stretcher. But in that instant, I didn't feel a sliver of concern for him in my heart. Instead, my mind automatically rewound, like an old movie 5 years back, to the day I first set foot in that house. The bright operating room lights above my head faded, superimposed by the dazzling sun of a summer afternoon. It was the day Cairo first took me to his parents' house in a quiet neighborhood in Atlanta, Georgia, to introduce me to his family. I remember my nerves vividly. I wore my favorite light blue sundress and firmly held a carefully wrapped gift basket of gourmet goods, mentally rehearsing that I needed to be polite and considerate to make a good impression on my future in-laws. The Cairo of then was the embodiment of everything I had dreamed of. He was tall, handsome, spoke eloquently, and always looked at me with loving eyes. He told me his family was very well educated and strict, that his parents were very kind, and that he had a younger sister, Zola, who was the family treasure because she had been orphaned young. He insisted that I should treat Zola very well. I believed him. I believed every word. The house where his family lived wasn't huge. A modest, well-kept bungalow on a quiet street in the Cascade Heights area. His mother, Mrs. Octavia Johnson, greeted me with a polite smile. She wasn't overly enthusiastic, but showed no discomfort. She asked a few questions about my job and my family and nodded, saying that being a doctor was a good profession for saving lives. But for some reason, I felt an invisible distance in her words. And then Zola appeared. She came out of her room in an immaculate white dress, her long, dark hair falling to her shoulders. She had large, round, clear eyes and a smile so innocent it could melt the hardest heart. She ran to hug Cairo and said in a sweet voice, "Brother, you came. I missed you." Then she turned to me, blinked and said, "So this is Celine. She's gorgeous." In that moment, I was completely fooled by her pure appearance. I thought she was truly pitiful. A poor orphaned girl. I promised myself that when I became her sister-in-law, I would treat her like a blood sister, making up for all the emotional neglect she had suffered. Oh, how naive and stupid the 5 years ago me was. I didn't realize that behind those clear eyes hid an abyss of calculation and jealousy. Our wedding took place soon after. I invested almost all my savings, accumulated over years of work, to prepare a decent wedding alongside Cairo. I wanted his family to feel proud in front of their relatives and friends. On the wedding day, Zola also wore a white bridesmaid dress. She cried buckets when Cairo placed the ring on my finger. Everyone said she was crying tears of joy, seeing her brother find happiness. Only I glimpsed a strange look in her eyes at that moment, a look I would only understand later. It was one of regret and hatred. But the bride's happiness soon made me forget that uneasiness. In my first days as a daughter-in-law, I did everything possible to adapt. No matter how hard the work was at the hospital or how many shifts I had, I would get up at 5 in the morning to go to the market and prepare breakfast for the whole family. No matter how tired I was when I returned at night, I would rush to the kitchen to prepare Cairo and his family's favorite dishes. I bought my mother-in-law the best nutritional supplements and my father-in-law the set of cigars he longed for. I treated Zola better than a sister. New clothes, expensive cosmetics, I denied her nothing. I did all of this without a single complaint. I just wanted to be accepted, to feel the warmth of a family. But all I received in return was indifference. My mother-in-law never praised me. No matter how delicious my food was, she would just eat in silence and occasionally blurt out, "This is a little salty," or "Today's soup is bland." She never asked if my work was hard or if I was struggling. In her eyes, I, a doctor saving lives, seemed to be nothing more than the unpaid maid of the house. And Cairo, my husband, where was he during these moments? He was there. He sat beside me at every meal, but he never said a word in my defense. When his mother unfairly scolded me, he simply bowed his head and ate. When I was exhausted after a long shift, he didn't offer a single word of comfort. He only knew how to say one thing: "Have a little patience. Mom is like that, but deep down, she loves her daughter-in-law very much." It seemed that all his love was reserved for his adopted sister, Zola. Zola did absolutely nothing around the house. She would get up at 9 or 10 in the morning. After eating, she would retreat to her room, close the door, and spend the day on her phone or out with friends. My mother-in-law always defended her. "Leave her alone. She's just a child. What would she know? Besides, she's always been delicate. She can't do heavy work." Delicate. And I, who had just finished an 8-hour emergency surgery, was a rock. The favoritism became increasingly blatant. Once, I caught a terrible cold with a high fever and couldn't move from bed. I asked Cairo to make me some soup. He said yes and went down to the kitchen. Half an hour later, there was no soup, but Zola came up with a bowl of steaming chicken noodle soup, placed it on the nightstand, and said in her sweet voice, "Sis, drink it while it's hot." It seemed my brother wasn't getting the hint, so I made it. In that moment, I almost cried with emotion. I thought that finally someone in that house cared about me. But that night, passing by my mother-in-law's room, I overheard their conversation. "Mom, see? I told you. You have to let that woman get really sick to snap her into shape. A woman who only thinks about working and can't even prepare a decent meal for her husband. My poor brother." Zola's voice was no longer innocent. It was full of sarcasm. My mother-in-law replied, pleased, "My girl is the best. Come on, tomorrow Mom will buy you a new handbag." I stood outside the door, frozen. The bowl of soup I had held in my hands that morning suddenly turned into bitter poison in my throat. So that was it. It was all an act. They, the mother-in-law and sister-in-law, had been conspiring to portray me as useless in my husband's eyes. I wanted to go in and expose them, but I didn't. I knew that if I did, Cairo wouldn't believe me. He would think I was jealous of his poor sister, that I was petty. I chose silence. I swallowed my tears. I consoled myself by thinking that as long as Cairo still loved me, everything would be fine. But I didn't know that my silence that day was a form of tolerating evil. And so it grew day by day, and on this fateful night it exploded, shattering everything. "Scalpel!" My voice echoing in the OR snapped me out of the painful rush of memories. I looked at Zola's wound, which was still steadily bleeding. The hatred inside me suddenly calmed, leaving only a doctor's sense of responsibility. Her life was now in my hands. But if I saved her, would she repent? Or would it be the start of an even more cruel conspiracy? Zola's surgery lasted over 3 hours. She had a ruptured vessel, causing severe internal hemorrhage. It was a complex surgery that required extreme concentration. And during those 3 hours, I erased every personal feeling from my mind. Before me wasn't the sister-in-law who had betrayed me with my husband, but simply a patient, a life that needed saving. I worked with the utmost professionalism and medical ethics. I meticulously sutured every ruptured blood vessel, stopped the bleeding, and treated the wound with the greatest care. When I finished the last suture, I let out a sigh of relief and felt all the energy drain from my body. The operation had been a success. Zola was out of danger. I walked out of the operating room. The dim hallway light hurt my eyes. As I peeled off the sweat-soaked surgical mask, the cold air hit my face. Just then, a figure lunged at me. Before I could react, a loud slap landed on my cheek. "You witch! What did you do to my daughter?" It was Mrs. Octavia Johnson, my mother-in-law. She was there, her eyes wide and her face contorted with rage. The slap was so sudden and painful that I staggered. But I didn't cry or raise my hand to my face. I simply stood up straight, looked her directly in the eyes, and said in an icy voice, "Your daughter? I just saved her life." Mrs. Johnson was speechless for a moment. She probably didn't expect me to react with such calm. She was accustomed to the submissive and obedient daughter-in-law. This Dr. Celine Calloway, with her sharp gaze and firm voice, was a stranger to her. "You're lying," she stammered. "If you saved her, why did you take so long? You did it on purpose to torture her, didn't you?" I managed a scornful smile. "Ask the Chief of Emergency Services, who was with me during the operation. If I had delayed even a little longer, you probably wouldn't have the opportunity to insult me here right now." Just then, Dr. Sterling Tate, whom I had always considered my mentor and a respected colleague, walked out of the recovery room. He had overheard our conversation and approached with a frown. "Mrs. Johnson, why are you causing this commotion? This is a hospital." Mrs. Johnson shrank a little upon seeing Dr. Tate, but she still pointed a finger at me indignantly. "Doctor, look at my daughter-in-law. Her husband is lying there after an accident, and she doesn't even care. She spent hours in the OR operating on someone else. Where have you ever seen a wife like that?" Dr. Tate looked at me with understanding, then addressed Mrs. Johnson severely. "Ma'am, I believe there's a misunderstanding. The female patient arrived in a much more critical state. Dr. Calloway's decision to prioritize her surgery is completely in line with emergency protocol. She did an excellent job. If it weren't for her, the patient's life would have been in grave danger. You should be grateful to your daughter-in-law." Every word from Dr. Tate was like a cold shower over Mrs. Johnson's rage. She was speechless, unable to retort. Her face turned from red to pale in a pitiful spectacle. She gave me a murderous look and stormed off toward Cairo's room. I watched her leave, feeling not so much satisfaction as an infinite weariness. What had I sacrificed for this family? I worked day and night to cover the expenses of the entire household. I had silently endured their scorn and criticism for the last 5 years, and in the end, in their eyes, I was still an insignificant daughter-in-law, a harbinger of bad luck. The truth is, without me, this family wouldn't be where it is today. I remembered the day we decided to buy a new condo in a good residential neighborhood in the city's north side. Cairo was a simple sales manager, and his salary barely covered expenses. The $75,000 down payment came entirely from my savings, money I had earned with sleepless night shifts and rushed meals at the hospital. But when it came time to sign the deed, Cairo told me, "Why don't we put it in both our names? We're married, and it will make my parents feel more secure." I accepted without a second thought. I believed the house was ours, that money wasn't more important than feelings. And the SUV Cairo drives now? I bought that too. He said he needed it for work, to make a good impression on clients. I agreed again. I gave him a family credit card so he could spend money without having to ask me. I thought that if my husband succeeded, I would be proud too. And Zola, that fragile sister-in-law, her private college tuition, the summer course in New York City, the designer clothes, the expensive handbags. Where did all that come from? From my pocket. Every time she sweetly asked her brother for something, Cairo would turn to me and say, "Come on, give her a little, the poor thing." And I would relent again. I considered her my true sister. I wanted her to live without lack, without feeling disadvantaged. It turns out I wasn't just supporting my husband and my in-laws, but also my husband's mistress. I was nothing more than a walking ATM, an ATM that knew how to walk, work, and even endure. My generosity, my sacrifice, was stupidity in their eyes. They had grown accustomed to receiving without having to give. They had grown accustomed to me always being in the shadows, silently supporting their life of luxury and vain appearance. I gave them everything, and in return, I received the bitterest of betrayals. "Celine, go rest for a bit. You look terrible." Dr. Tate's voice pulled me from my thoughts. I nodded, thanked him, and headed with heavy steps toward the doctor's lounge. I needed rest, not from physical exhaustion, but because my soul was drained. But I knew I couldn't collapse now. The play had just begun. The evidence I had just remembered, the injustices I had suffered, all of it would be fuel for the revenge to come. Are they used to the docile and patient Celine Calloway? Perfect. I'm going to show them a completely different Celine, a Celine whose very name will make them tremble. How much has this in-laws hypocrisy outraged you? If your kindness has ever been taken advantage of and you seek understanding, leave a comment below and share your story. Every shared story is a brick building a strong wall we can all lean on. I didn't go directly to the lounge. Instead, I headed to Cairo's room, where he was under observation after the CT scan. The room door was slightly ajar, and a mix of my mother-in-law's sobs and my father-in-law's grave voice came from inside. "Octavia, stop crying. Making a scene won't solve anything. The doctor said Cairo only has a mild concussion. His life isn't in danger," said Mr. Sterling Johnson. "Isn't in danger? And why does he look like that? Head bandaged up like that? It's all because of her. Since she set foot in this house, we haven't had a single day of peace." Mrs. Johnson's voice was still loaded with venom. I stood silently outside the door, clenching my fists. Even in a situation like this, she was still finding a way to blame me. "Shut up for a minute," shouted Mr. Johnson. "What if the doctors hear you? Do you think I don't know about Cairo and Zola? You encouraged them, and now that everything has exploded, you blame Celine? Do you realize how irrational you're being?" I was stunned. My father-in-law knew. He knew about the affair between Cairo and Zola. Then why had he kept silent all this time? Me? What did I encourage? I only did it because I felt sorry for Zola. What's wrong with Cairo taking care of his sister a little? Don't accuse me unfairly. Mrs. Johnson's voice sounded somewhat guilty. "Pity?" Mr. Johnson scoffed. "Look at how she spends money. Designer clothes, the latest cell phone. Where do you think all that comes from? Do you think I'm old and don't know what's going on? It's all Celine's money. She busts her butt to support this whole house, her husband, and her sister-in-law, and you treat her worse than a stranger? Don't you think you're too cruel?" Every word from my father-in-law was like a hammer blow to my chest, but it wasn't a hammer blow of pain. It was of astonishment. In that cold house, there was at least one person who recognized my effort and sacrifice. Even though he had never said it, he knew. Mrs. Johnson fell silent. She probably didn't expect her husband to say something like that. After a long moment, she shouted bitterly, "How wonderful! Defending her! Is she your daughter-in-law or your daughter? You're not thinking about this family's reputation. If this gets out, where will we hide our faces?" "Reputation?" Mr. Johnson's voice was full of sarcasm. "Did you think about reputation when your son was sneaking into hotels with his sister? Did you think about reputation when you were buying things for your son's mistress with your daughter-in-law's money? And now you're ashamed? It's too late." Their conversation was interrupted by a groan from Cairo. "Dad, Mom, my head hurts so much." I heard the sound of a chair moving and hurried footsteps. I knew I shouldn't keep listening. I turned away silently, but my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. My father-in-law, whom I considered a reserved, old-school man, complicit with his wife, turned out to be the only one who understood me. But why did he choose silence? Was there some deeper reason? I headed to Dr. Tate's office. I needed to know more about Cairo's condition. Dr. Tate was looking at the CT scan images. Seeing me enter, he gestured to a chair. "Sit down. I was just about to call you." "How is he?" I asked. "He got lucky," Dr. Tate said, not hiding a hint of irony. "Mild concussion, minimal epidural hematoma. With a few days of observation, he can go home. The impact was mainly because he wasn't wearing his seatbelt and his blood alcohol level was quite high." No seatbelt, high alcohol level. Every clue confirmed what I already knew. They had a night of fun and recklessness, and now they were paying the consequences. "And the girl?" I asked, forcing myself to maintain an indifferent tone. "She's much worse. Besides the ruptured vessel, she has 2 fractured ribs and a pulmonary contusion. She'll need to be admitted for at least a couple of weeks. You acted just in time. Otherwise, the outcome would have been uncertain." Dr. Tate looked at me with concern. "Celine, I know how difficult this is for you, but you have to stay strong. If you need help, tell me." "Thank you, doctor." I managed a tired smile. "I'm okay. It's just that, as the treating physician and a family member, I might need to check the belongings of both patients, to contact family, or find any necessary documents." Dr. Tate hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Technically, it's against regulations, but in this case, it seems necessary. Go to administration and say I gave you permission." I knew I was bending the rules, but I had to do it. I needed to find out where they had been, what they had done. I needed irrefutable proof to end this charade once and for all. I went to administration. The charge nurse looked at me with a mix of curiosity and compassion. She handed me 2 sealed plastic evidence bags. One was Cairo's, the other Zola's. I took them. They felt strangely heavy. I didn't open them immediately. I took them to the doctor's lounge where no one was and locked the door. I sat down in a chair, took a deep breath, and only then slowly opened Cairo's bag. Inside was the alligator skin wallet I had given him for our 3rd anniversary, his latest iPhone model with a shattered screen and a set of keys. I opened the wallet. Besides his ID and a few credit cards, I found something that chilled my heart. It wasn't a picture of me or a family photo. It was a small picture of Zola at Myrtle Beach in a sexy bikini with a radiant smile. The photo was somewhat worn with pink edges. How long had he been carrying it in his wallet? I felt a surge of anger and disgust, but I suppressed it. I put the photo aside and opened Zola's bag. Inside, there was also a broken cell phone, a designer wallet, and some jewelry. But when I dumped the contents of the bag onto the table, other things spilled out that gave me goosebumps. A hotel room key with the logo of the Serenity Retreat, a luxurious resort just outside Charlotte, North Carolina, an already opened box of the morning after pill, and a receipt. I picked up the receipt. The numbers and letters on it seemed to dance before my eyes. It was an invoice for a 2-day, 1-night stay in the presidential suite, with additional services like wine, a romantic candlelight dinner, and a couple's spa package. The total amount came to nearly $3,000. $3,000. And the payer was Cairo Johnson. Now, everything was too obvious. Everything was exposed. Not only were they meeting in secret, but they were going on romantic getaways with my money. While I was wearing myself out with shifts and family worries, they were living like a real married couple. I sat there amidst the evidence of betrayal. I didn't cry or scream. I only felt a terrifying emptiness. But in that void, an idea, a plan, began to germinate. They were speechless. But I knew this was only the beginning. And what I was about to uncover in their belongings would be the real proof that would chill my blood. I sat motionless in the doctor's lounge. The cold, fluorescent light illuminated the evidence of betrayal scattered across the table, the resort receipt, the pill box, the photo of Zola in Cairo's wallet. Every object seemed to shout, mocking my stupidity of the last 5 years. I had thought the greatest pain was seeing them together, but no. The greatest pain was realizing that the deception had been meticulously planned, executed behind my back, and financed with the money I earned by the sweat of my brow. I no longer felt pain, only an icy rage that seeped into my bones. I wasn't going to let this end so easily. They had hurt me too much. They had to pay a commensurate price. I carefully gathered everything, and with my phone, I photographed every detail of the receipt, the pillbox, and the photo. I knew these would be my sharpest weapons in the battle ahead. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wouldn't show them my anger. I would continue playing the role of the compassionate wife, the generous sister-in-law. I would let them gloat, let them drop their guard, and when they least expected it, I would deliver the final blow. I deleted all the photos I had just taken from the gallery and moved them to a password-protected hidden folder. Then I returned the 2 bags of belongings to administration, saying I hadn't found any useful information. I had to erase every trace. No one could know that I knew everything. I returned to Cairo's room. Mrs. Johnson was still sitting there with a sour expression. Mr. Johnson was silently reading the newspaper. Seeing me enter, Mrs. Johnson eyed me sideways, then turned her head. I didn't say anything either. I quietly approached the bed and checked Cairo's IV drip. He was still asleep. His breathing was regular. Looking at the face that had once made my heart race, I now only felt strangeness and repulsion. I forced a worried expression and asked Mr. Johnson, "Father-in-law, did the doctor say when Cairo will wake up?" Mr. Johnson folded the newspaper and looked at me. There was an apology in his eyes. "The doctor says probably this afternoon. You've been up all night. Why don't you go home and rest a little? We'll stay here." "No, father-in-law." I shook my head and said in a weak voice, "How can I rest easy with Cairo like this? It's better if I stay here in case I can help with anything." I knew I had to stay to play my role perfectly, to show them my loyalty and generosity, and more importantly, to observe and find out more. I wanted to know how they would treat me after all this. That afternoon, Cairo woke up. The first thing he did wasn't to ask about me, but to look around, searching for someone. "Zola? Where is Zola? Is she okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse and full of concern. I felt like an invisible hand squeezed my heart, but I maintained my composure. "Zola is fine. I just operated on her. She's in recovery now, under observation." Hearing me, Cairo let out a sigh of relief. Thank you so much, Celine," he said, taking my hand with a look full of gratitude. But I knew that gratitude wasn't for me, but for saving his mistress. I withdrew my hand silently. "Rest. Don't talk much. You'll get tired." Mrs. Johnson, seeing her son awake, quickly rushed over, happy to ask how he was, but her first question wasn't about her son's health either. "Cairo, tell Mom how you two ended up like this. Did this Celine do something to you to make you mad and leave the house?" I stood there, listening to her words, and couldn't help but laugh internally. Even in this situation, she was still looking for a way to blame me. Cairo seemed baffled. He looked at me sideways, then at his mother. "No, Mom, it was my fault." "Your fault? Nonsense," Mrs. Johnson snapped. "Don't I know you? I'm your mother. Surely your wife did something wrong. She made you angry, and that's why—" "Mom, stop," Cairo interrupted her suddenly. It was the first time in 5 years I had seen him do something like that. He turned to me with a complex look. There was guilt, but also something akin to fear. "Celine, I'm sorry." His apology didn't move me. On the contrary, it put me more on guard. Why was he apologizing? Was he afraid I would tell everything? Or was there another conspiracy behind that apology? I didn't answer. I simply turned away in silence. I headed to Zola's recovery room. I had to check on her. When I arrived, Zola had also just woken up from surgery. She was weak and pale, without a trace of her usual arrogance and defiance. Seeing me, her eyes widened, and after a flash of surprise, her gaze became cautious. "Sis, what are you doing here?" she asked in a thin voice. I pulled up a chair and sat next to her bed. "I came to see if you were dead," I said in an icy voice. Zola turned as white as a ghost, and stiffened. "Sis, what are you saying? Did you hear me correctly?" I smiled slightly. "I asked if you were dead. If not, it's a pity. If you were dead, everything would be much simpler." The fragile expression vanished from Zola's face, replaced by anger. "How dare you?" "Oh, I dare," I interrupted her. "And not just in words, but in deeds. Your life was saved by me, so I can also take it away. Easy, don't you think?" I leaned into her face and whispered menacingly in her ear. "Don't think I don't know the beautiful things you and your dear brother have been doing behind my back. The serenity retreat, the morning after pill. Do you need me to continue?" Zola's entire body violently trembled. She looked at me with disbelief, her eyes filled with fear and panic. "How? How?" "I know much more than you think," I smirked. I backed up a few steps and recovered my cold, medical expression. "I'm giving you a chance. Either you tell me everything, or I'll make sure the rest of your life in this hospital is worse than death. You choose." With that, I turned and left, leaving Zola plunged into absolute terror. I knew I was doing something very dangerous. I was threatening my patient, but I had no other option. To protect myself, sometimes I also had to become a beast. And I had a feeling that the relationship between Cairo and Zola was not a simple affair. There was a much darker secret behind it, and only Zola could give me the answer. My threat seemed to have an effect. Throughout that night, Zola suffered a panic attack. Her blood pressure spiked, and she showed signs of infection at the surgical wound site. The on-call nurse had to call me to return to the hospital in the middle of the night. When I entered, Zola was curled up in bed, trembling from head to toe, her eyes wide with fear. Seeing me, it was as if she had seen a ghost, and she quickly pulled the blanket over her head. I motioned for the nurse to leave. I pulled up a chair and sat down to observe her in silence. I didn't say anything, letting the silence and her own fear do their work. After a long time, unable to bear the suffocating silence, Zola peeked her head out from under the blanket and looked at me with pleading eyes. "Sis, please, I'll tell you everything. I'll tell you everything," she pleaded. But I continued to wait in silence. "This isn't just about me and Cairo," Zola began, trembling with fear. "Octavia, your mother-in-law knew everything. She was the one who planned it all." I was stunned. Mrs. Octavia Johnson? My mother-in-law? That woman who always pretended to be strict and moralistic was the one pulling the strings of this sinful relationship? "Continue," I ordered in an expressionless voice. Zola told me everything, shaking. Her relationship with Cairo had started before I married him. They were in love since college, but Mrs. Johnson firmly opposed it because Zola was an orphan and her family wasn't up to standard. She forced Cairo to break up with Zola and marry me, a woman with a stable job, high income, and a normal family, to get a shield and someone to financially support the family. But because she couldn't bear to see her son suffer, she allowed them to continue seeing each other behind my back. She told Zola, "Just be his mistress in the shadows. Don't worry, wait a few years, and once that Celine Calloway gives this house a child, I'll find a way to kick her out so you two can be together officially." Hearing those words, I felt my blood run cold. It was a cruel and perfect conspiracy. They had turned me into a tool, a breeding machine, an ATM. They had used my love and my sacrifice for their dirty plan. They had calculated everything, except for one thing, that I couldn't have children. "And why now?" I asked hoarsely. "Why the rush to go on vacation? Why were you so careless as to have an accident?" Zola hesitated for a moment, then confessed something even more terrible. "Because I was pregnant." Pregnant? That word echoed in my ears like thunder. I looked at Zola's abdomen, still bandaged from the operation. "But you just suffered a ruptured vessel. How come no?" Zola interrupted me in a low voice. "I was almost 3 months along. Because of the accident. I lost it." I jumped up. The chair fell backward with a crash. My entire body trembled violently. I had saved her, but I hadn't been able to save an innocent life that was guilty of nothing. Me, a doctor, didn't know my patient was pregnant. The mother-in-law, your mother-in-law, knew I was pregnant, Zola continued. She was the one who rushed us to go on vacation so I could rest and get away from you. She said that as soon as I gave birth to a child, she would tell Cairo to divorce you, that your assets, the condo, the SUV, would all end up belonging to Cairo and our son. I couldn't listen anymore. I staggered out of the room, leaning on the wall so I wouldn't fall. Everything had crossed the line of my patience. The betrayal, the deceit, the calculation, all taken to the extreme. They not only wanted to take my husband, but also my child, had I had one, and my assets. They were a pack of demons in human skin. I ran to the bathroom and vomited violently. I vomited everything I had in my stomach, and with it, all the bitterness and anger I had suppressed for the last 5 years. When I had nothing left to throw up, I collapsed onto the cold floor and burst into tears. I cried like a child. I cried for my fate, for the baby that never saw the light. I cried for everything. But amidst the sobs, I saw my reflection in the mirror opposite, a pathetic, miserable woman with swollen eyes and a face etched with tears. No, I couldn't collapse like this. I couldn't let them get away with it. I had cried enough. From this moment on, there would be no more tears, only hatred and a ruthless plan for revenge. I stood up, washed my face, and stared intently into my eyes in the mirror, bloodshot but now sharp. Celine Calloway, you have to live. You have to live to make them pay. And I knew that to carry out that plan, I couldn't do it alone. I needed an ally. And at this moment, the only person I could trust, the only person with the strength and understanding to help me, was my father-in-law, Mr. Sterling Johnson. Mrs. Johnson had calculated everything, but she had made one fatal mistake, underestimating her husband's silence. The story has reached its tensest point. Will Celine's revenge plan succeed? And what will her father-in-law's role be in this war? If you're looking forward to this exciting turn of events, subscribe to the channel now to be the first to see the next chapter. Your support is the engine that drives us to continue this story. The next morning, I woke up with an unusual mental clarity. The crying from the night before seemed to have washed away all the weakness and doubt inside me. Now only one goal remained in my mind: making those who had hurt me pay. I knew that to confront someone as cunning as Mrs. Johnson, hatred wasn't enough. I needed a perfect, seamless plan, and for that, I needed the help of my father-in-law, Mr. Sterling Johnson. Taking advantage of Mrs. Johnson being out running errands, I waited until noon to visit Cairo's room. Mr. Johnson was sitting there quietly peeling an apple for his son. Seeing me enter, he looked up with a slight surprise in his eyes. I didn't say anything. I simply pulled up a chair and sat across from him. "Father-in-law," I began, my voice calm and clear, "I need to talk to you." Mr. Johnson put down the knife and the apple and looked at me intently. "Speak. I'm listening." I didn't beat around the bush. I told him everything Zola had confessed to me the night before. I spoke about Mrs. Johnson's conspiracy, how she knew and consented to the relationship between Cairo and Zola even before our marriage. I talked about her plan to turn me into a breeding machine and an ATM. And finally, I spoke about Zola's lost child and how Mrs. Johnson had promised to pave the way for Zola and her child to replace me. As I spoke, my voice remained firm, without a hint of trembling. I wasn't complaining to ask for compassion. I was simply stating the facts. While I spoke, Mr. Johnson listened in silence. His face grew darker. His hands, resting on his knees, clenched so tightly that his veins showed. When I finished, he sighed deeply, saying nothing. That sigh seemed to contain all the disappointment and pain in the world. After a long time, he looked at me. His eyes were a mix of sorrow and guilt. "Celine, I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "I was a coward. I knew your mother-in-law wasn't a good person, but for the sake of the family, for appearances, I chose silence. I didn't know my silence would cause you so much pain." "I don't blame you, father-in-law," I replied. "I just want to ask you one thing. Are you willing to join me now to expose all of this? To seek justice for me and for that lost child?" A determination I had never seen before shone in Mr. Johnson's eyes. "What do I need to do?" he asked. "Only one thing," I said, leaning closer to him. "Trust me and follow my plan. I promise I won't disappoint you." My plan was very simple, yet very audacious. I wanted to use Mrs. Johnson's own conspiracy as a weapon against her. I wanted to play their game of plays. Perfect. I was going to stage a much bigger play with her, a play in which I was the director. As a first step, I asked Mr. Johnson to call Mrs. Johnson and tell her that Cairo, upon learning of Zola's baby loss, was heartbroken and distraught. Mr. Johnson had to play the role of the husband trying to console his wife. He had to tell her that what's done is done, and that the most important thing now was for Zola to recover soon to give the family another legitimate heir. He also had to hint that Cairo was completely disappointed in me and seemed anxious for a divorce. Mr. Johnson played his part perfectly on the phone. Mrs. Johnson, hearing him, let out a sigh of relief. She believed everything was going according to plan, that I still didn't know anything, and that Cairo was completely on her side. She suspected nothing, and even cheerfully told Mr. Johnson that she would buy the best restorative foods for her future daughter-in-law. As a second step, I began my own performance. I pretended to be a wife engulfed in pain and regret. I went to Cairo's room crying and apologized for not taking good care of him. I told him I was too focused on my job and had neglected the family. I promised I would change. I would be a good wife. Cairo, caught between the guilt he already felt and my surprising change of attitude, suspected nothing. He even took my hand and consoled me, saying it wasn't my fault. I also went to Zola's room, bringing her fruit and chicken soup. I sat by her side and, with tearful eyes, took her hand. "Zola, I'm sorry. I didn't know." I left the sentence unfinished on purpose. Zola, who had already received my instructions, also acted perfectly. She burst into tears and said, "Sis, it's my fault. I betrayed your trust." We enacted a touching scene of reconciliation between sisters-in-law. And of course, that scene reached Mrs. Johnson's ears. She became even more euphoric. She believed I had given up completely, that I was trying to reconcile with her to save my marriage. The trap was perfectly laid. All the actors were in their positions. The mother-in-law, drunk on her victory, had no idea that the net my father-in-law and I had secretly woven was slowly closing around her. And the biggest fish swimming directly into that net was herself. In the following days, I continued gathering crucial evidence. I asked a friend who works at a telephone company to get me all the call and text message records between Mrs. Johnson, Cairo, and Zola for the last year. The evidence clearly exposed their plan, from organizing Cairo's business trips, which were actually getaways with Zola, to discussing ways to fleece me for money. Everything was ready. I was just waiting for the opportune moment, a stage big enough to drop the curtain on this farce. And the opportunity arrived sooner than I thought. Mrs. Johnson, in her arrogance, decided to throw a party at the house to celebrate that Cairo and Zola had recovered from the accident. She invited all their relatives and close friends. Her goal was evident, to use the occasion to publicly humiliate me and pave the way for Zola. She didn't know that the party she had so carefully prepared would be the stage I had been waiting for. It would be the place where all the dirty secrets would come to light. The party took place on a Saturday night in the same house that I had helped pay for with a small fortune. The house was lavishly decorated, the lights shone, and the atmosphere was bustling. Mrs. Johnson, in a dark red velvet suit, strolled around, greeting everyone with a triumphant smile. She looked like a queen presiding over a victory banquet. Cairo and Zola had also been discharged. Cairo wore an elegant suit, although his face was still pale. He walked beside me, occasionally saying a word of interest, playing the role of the repentant husband perfectly. Zola, in an immaculate white dress, sat in a corner, pretending to be fragile and pitiful. All the relatives' sympathetic glances were directed at her. I, the protagonist of this failed farce, simply wore a modest black dress with light makeup to hide my tiredness. I moved around the party, serving tea and drinks, fulfilling my role as the devoted daughter-in-law and generous wife. No one realized that behind my resigned smile, a storm was brewing. When almost everyone had finished dinner, Mrs. Johnson rose solemnly, raised her wine glass, and spoke up. Today, on behalf of my family, I want to thank everyone who has come from afar to share our joy. Recently, our family went through a great scare. My son and my adopted daughter suffered an unfortunate accident, but thanks to the blessing of our ancestors and the help of heaven, both have overcome the crisis. She paused and looked at me arrogantly. I also take this opportunity to thank my daughter-in-law, Celine Calloway. Although there have been some misunderstandings in their marriage, in these difficult times, she has cared for and treated her husband and sister-in-law with great devotion. She is a truly dutiful daughter-in-law. The room erupted in applause. People looked at me with admiration, praising my tolerance and generosity. Mrs. Johnson smiled triumphantly. She had successfully built the image of a reasonable mother-in-law, of a harmonious and happy family. I had become a tool to enhance her own reputation. But she didn't know that her play was about to end. When almost everyone had finished eating, Mrs. Johnson rose again. This time, her voice was slightly more serious. Friends, today, besides celebrating my children's recovery, I have another important announcement to make. The room fell silent. She cleared her throat and looked directly at me. The relationship between Cairo and Celine has suffered many cracks recently, and both are exhausted. I believe the time has come for them to let each other go. Let each other go. Those 4 words, although she said them softly, sounded like a pre-pronounced sentence. People began to whisper. She raised her hand to silence them. But our family is a decent family. Celine has been our daughter-in-law for 5 years, and even if she hasn't had any merits, she has worked hard. Therefore, after the divorce, our family has decided to give Celine a compensation of $15,000 as a small help for the girl to start a new life. And this house where the couple lived is our family's property, so naturally, Cairo will continue managing it. $15,000 and the house was their family's property. Her audacity exceeded my imagination. The condo I had bought with over $75,000 had now become her family's property, and my 5 years of effort, money, and youth were only worth $15,000. I saw Zola's mocking smile and Cairo's triumphant look. They were waiting for me to cry, beg, or make a scene. But I didn't. I slowly stood up, stepped forward, and faced everyone. I didn't look at Mrs. Johnson, but directly at my father-in-law, Mr. Sterling Johnson, the last remaining conscience in this family. Father-in-law, uncles, aunts, everyone. I began to speak. My voice wasn't loud, but it clearly resonated throughout the room. May I say a few words? Mrs. Johnson tried to interrupt me, but Mr. Johnson raised his hand to stop her. Speak, he said. I appreciate my mother-in-law's generosity. I turned to Mrs. Johnson. A cold smile appeared on my lips. $15,000 is a lot of money, but I don't think I'll need it because... I paused, surveyed everyone, and then continued with a firm voice. Because all my fortune, my husband's, and probably this whole family's, is about to vanish down to the last penny. The entire room erupted in commotion. People looked at me with disbelief. Mrs. Johnson shouted, "What are you saying? Have you gone crazy?" I haven't gone crazy, I replied. My voice was frighteningly calm. I'm just speaking the truth. A truth I believe everyone here needs to know. I turned and signaled to someone no one expected. The living room door opened, and none other than Dr. Sterling Tate walked in with his white coat. Behind him followed 2 uniformed Fulton County police officers. The festive atmosphere of the party froze instantly. Everyone was speechless. They didn't understand what was happening. The appearance of Dr. Sterling Tate and the 2 police officers turned the family party into an impromptu courtroom. All eyes shifted from surprise and curiosity to confusion and fear. Mrs. Johnson was the first to react. She jumped up, pointed a finger at me, and shouted in a high-pitched voice, "You! Why did you call the police? Do you want to cause a scandal here?" "No, I didn't come to cause a scandal," I replied with the same surprisingly calm voice. "I only brought some people to testify to the truth." Dr. Tate stepped forward. His face was solemn. "Good evening, everyone. I am Sterling Tate, Chief of Emergency Services at Fulton University Hospital. Today I'm not here as a doctor, but as a witness." He turned to Cairo and Zola, who were sitting frozen in their chairs. "Mr. Cairo Johnson, Ms. Zola Johnson, do you remember me?" Cairo and Zola bowed their heads, not daring to look at him. Dr. Tate continued, "Both of you were taken to the hospital after a traffic accident, but blood tests revealed that Mr. Johnson's blood alcohol level exceeded the legal limit. You drove while intoxicated, endangering your life and the lives of others. It is a crime that carries criminal responsibility." One of the police officers beside him nodded, confirming, "We have enough evidence to press charges. Mr. Johnson will have to assume legal responsibility for his actions." Mrs. Johnson staggered and almost fell. She never would have imagined that the accident she considered simple bad luck would have legal implications. But that was only the beginning. I stepped forward and took a stack of papers from Dr. Tate's hand. "Friends," my voice resonated. "My husband driving drunk may have been a momentary mistake, but there are other systematically calculated mistakes that cannot be forgiven." I held up the Serenity Retreat receipt. "This is the receipt for the romantic getaway of my husband and my sister-in-law, Ms. Zola Johnson, just before the accident. The total cost was nearly $3,000, paid with the family credit card I gave my husband, linked to my bank account." Murmurs arose. People looked at Cairo and Zola with contempt. "And that's not all," I continued, pulling out the bank statements I had prepared. "Over the past year, my husband has been secretly transferring money from our joint account to a secret account in Zola Johnson's name. The total exceeds $50,000. This money was used for Ms. Johnson to buy luxury items, travel, and pay the down payment for a luxury apartment. All with the money I earned by the sweat of my brow." You're making this up," shouted Mrs. Johnson. "That can't be." "Made up or not, these numbers don't lie," I replied, placing the statements on the table. "If my mother-in-law doesn't believe me, she can check directly with the bank. And more importantly," I paused and stared intently at Zola, who was trembling. "Perhaps that money was for the expenses of the heir this whole family was waiting for. Right, Zola?" My words were like a bomb in the middle of the room. Everyone gasped, unable to believe what they were hearing. Zola pregnant with Cairo's child? Mrs. Johnson looked at her son and then at Zola in disbelief. She knew they were seeing each other, but perhaps not even she knew about the pregnancy. Zola burst into tears and buried her face in the table. Her silence was the most eloquent confession. In that moment, another woman among the crowd stood up. She was Cairo's cousin's wife. She approached Zola and said with a compassionate voice, "Zola, is it true? Tell us all." Then she turned to me. Her eyes were full of apology. "Celine, I'm sorry. I knew about Cairo and Zola for a long time. I tried to stop them several times, but they wouldn't listen. I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid of breaking up the family." My cousin-in-law's confession was like another stab in my already shattered heart. Not just the in-laws, but other relatives also knew. They had hidden it together. They had taken me for a fool together. But there was no time for sadness anymore. I had to finish this play. I looked at Cairo, who was sitting like a stone statue without a single word of explanation or apology. "Cairo," I called his name in an icy voice. "Don't you have anything to say?" Cairo raised his head and looked at me with empty eyes. "Selina, But he couldn't continue because, at that moment, my father-in-law, Mr. Sterling Johnson, who had remained silent from the beginning, suddenly stood up, walked toward Cairo without saying a word, and, to everyone's astonishment, raised his hand and delivered a loud slap across the cheek of his son, whom he had always been so proud of. The mark of 5 fingers was imprinted on his face. "You beast!" he shouted, his voice trembling with rage. "Do you know what you've done?" That slap wasn't just for Cairo. I knew it was Mr. Johnson's late apology and repentance toward me. The play was coming to an end, but could one slap erase all the wounds? Would the revealed truth bring me peace? Do you think the father-in-law's gesture is enough to calm Celine's pain? If you stand in solidarity with her, express your opinion with a like and leave a comment with your thoughts on the situation. Mr. Johnson's slap was like a bell waking everyone from their stupor. The tense atmosphere in the room turned into chaos. Mrs. Johnson, who had been stunned for a moment, finally reacted. But instead of acknowledging her son's guilt, she lunged at me. Her eyes were bloodshot. "It's all your fault, you barren woman. If you had given this house a grandchild, Cairo wouldn't have looked for another woman." Her cruel words were like poison, rubbing salt into the deepest wound of my heart. For the past 5 years, Cairo and I had visited countless fertility clinics. The doctors said we were both healthy, that the time simply hadn't come yet. I silently endured the pressure from my in-laws. I drank countless bitter herbal concoctions in the hope of having a child, and now that legitimate desire was turned into my sin, the excuse for her son's infidelity. "Mom!" Cairo shouted. It was probably the first time in his life he had raised his voice at his mother, but Mrs. Johnson had already lost her mind. She continued insulting and humiliating me with the most hurtful words. "I'm telling you, don't think you've won. Do you think you've won by unmasking Zola? She was pregnant with my son's child. You're nothing but a barren woman. You'll be kicked out of this house soon." Just then, a grave and powerful voice resonated, quieting all the noise. "You shut your mouth right now." It was Mr. Sterling Johnson. He approached and stood in front of me, confronting his wife. His face was red with anger. "You've had enough. Do you still consider yourself a human being? Celine has endured you and this whole family for 5 years. Isn't that enough? And now you have to step on her wounds? You're taking her side?" Mrs. Johnson stammered. "She's the daughter-in-law. It's normal for her to endure. Who told her she couldn't have children?" "She can't have children?" Mr. Johnson managed a bitter smile. That smile contained deep sadness. "Are you sure it's her fault, or is it because of your precious little son?" Mr. Johnson's words plunged the room back into silence. Everyone was bewildered, not understanding what he was referring to. Mrs. Johnson was also stunned. What do you mean?" Mr. Johnson didn't answer his wife. He turned to Cairo, who was hunched over and trembling. "Cairo, speak. Tell everyone here the truth. How many years have you been deceiving everyone, including your wife? The time has come for you to face your cowardice." Dad?" Cairo stammered. His face was chalk white. He raised his head and looked at me. In his eyes, I saw extreme desperation and shame. "Dad, please!" Mr. Johnson, determined not to give him an escape, said firmly, "If you don't speak today, don't call me father again." Under his father's pressure, and perhaps out of years of accumulated guilt, Cairo finally broke down. He knelt on the floor and burst into tears like a child. "It's my fault. It's all my fault," he said between sobs. I can't have children." That confession was like a bolt of lightning, leaving the entire room in shock. Mrs. Johnson staggered. She grabbed the arm of a chair, her eyes wide with disbelief. What did you say? Repeat it." 3 years ago, test results confirmed that I am infertile due to complications from mumps I had as a child, Cairo continued, crying. His voice was choked. "I didn't have the courage to tell anyone. I was afraid that Mom would be disappointed, that Celine would leave me, so I hid it from everyone." I stood there, listening to his words, feeling the world spin around me. Infertile. He was infertile, and for all these years, he had let me bear the pressure alone. He had made me believe it was my fault. He had allowed his mother to blame and humiliate me. He was an unforgivable coward. But then, an even more terrible question crossed my mind. If Cairo was infertile, whose child was Zola carrying? I turned to look at Zola, who was sitting stiffly in her chair, her face as white as paper. Everyone seemed to be thinking the same thing. All eyes were fixed on her. Mrs. Johnson opened her mouth, her voice trembling. "Zola, the child you were expecting wasn't Cairo's?" Zola didn't answer. She just shook her head vigorously as thick tears rolled down her cheeks. The air in the room became unbreathable. One secret had been revealed, only to give way to an even more monstrous secret. It seemed this play was not over yet. It had dark corners and truths that no one had anticipated, and I knew that to unveil the last secret, I had to do one thing that would decide the fate of everyone in that room. Cairo's confession changed everything. The fact that he was infertile was not only a shock to his family, but also posed a huge, terrifying question. If it wasn't Cairo's child, whose was the child Zola was expecting? All attention, all looks of suspicion and accusation were now focused on Zola Johnson. She was huddled in her chair, her face soaked with tears, trembling like a leaf in the wind. She didn't dare raise her head to look at anyone. "Speak! Tell me whose child it is!" Mrs. Johnson was the first to break the silence. She lunged at Zola, grabbed her hair, and screamed like a wounded animal. "You have deceived our whole family! Which bastard did you sleep with behind my son's back?" Zola only cried and pleaded. "No, ma'am, no, please!" Mr. Johnson and some relatives rushed to separate Mrs. Johnson. The room was plunged back into chaos. In the midst of that frenetic scene, I was the only one who remained calm. I no longer hated Zola. Instead, I felt pity for her. She too was a victim, a chess piece in Mrs. Johnson's game and Cairo's cowardice. But compassion did not mean forgiveness. The truth had to come out. I walked up to Zola and sat next to her. I didn't yell or accuse her. I simply placed a hand on her shoulder and said in a soft but firm voice, "Zola, look at me." Zola slowly raised her head. Her swollen eyes, full of fear, looked at me. "I don't blame you," I told her. "I know you've suffered a lot too, but you can't keep silent anymore. You have to tell the truth, not just for yourself, but also for the child you were carrying. He's not to blame. He has the right to know who his father is." My words seemed to touch the last thread of conscience Zola had left. She looked at me, then at Cairo, who was on the floor, and then at Mrs. Johnson, who was being held by others. Finally, as if gathering all her courage, she took a deep breath. "It was Mr. Sterling." The words Mr. Sterling were barely a whisper, but their impact was like that of an atomic bomb. The room fell into an unearthly silence. Everyone looked in disbelief at the father-in-law, Mr. Sterling Johnson, the patriarchal, dignified man who moments before had defended me and reprimanded his son. "You're lying to me!" shouted Mrs. Johnson hoarsely. "How dare you slander your father-in-law?" "I'm not lying." Zola burst into tears. "It's the truth. Mr. Sterling, he—" She couldn't continue. She just buried her face and wept. Mr. Sterling Johnson froze like a statue. His face turned from red to white. He grabbed the table, staggering so as not to fall. "No, it can't be," he muttered powerlessly. I myself couldn't believe what I had just heard. It was too absurd. It surpassed all imagination. It had gone from being a story of common infidelity to a terrible tragedy of incest. But then, I remembered small details I had previously overlooked. I remembered the times Mr. Johnson looked at Zola in a strange way. It wasn't the look of an adoptive father at his daughter. I remembered the times he bought her expensive gifts for no apparent reason, and I remembered the conversation I had overheard between Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Johnson when he said, "Do you think I don't know about Cairo and Zola?" At that moment, I thought he only knew about their affair. But perhaps he knew more. Perhaps he didn't just know. Perhaps he was a part of it. "Proof!" "What proof do you have?" shouted Mrs. Johnson, clinging to her last hope. "Or are you just talking nonsense to blame someone else? Proof!" Zola trembled. She rummaged through her purse and pulled out an old cell phone. In this, there are text messages." Just then, Mr. Johnson, who had been motionless, suddenly moved. He lunged at Zola to snatch the phone from her. "Give me that, you shameless girl. Do you want to ruin this whole family?" But I was faster. Since Zola mentioned the messages, I had anticipated Mr. Johnson's move. I stepped in and blocked his hand. A struggle ensued. The phone flew out of Mr. Johnson's hand and fell into mine. I caught it midair. "Don't you dare dream of it!" roared Mr. Johnson, lunging at me like a beast. But Dr. Tate and the 2 police officers intervened in time. They had been waiting just outside the door. "At my request, Mr. Sterling Johnson, calm down," one of the officers ordered, holding his arm firmly. "Any act of obstruction of justice will be punished by law." Mr. Johnson struggled powerlessly. His dignified, patriarchal air had completely vanished, leaving only the fear and madness of a discovered criminal. I clenched the phone in my hand. I felt my heart pound loudly. The last veil of the secret was about to be lifted, and I knew that the truth it contained would be the final stab that would completely end the hypocrisy and sin of this family. Zola's old cell phone was burning in my hand like a red-hot coal. It wasn't a simple electronic device. It was Pandora's box, containing the darkest secret of the Johnson family, the final, irrefutable proof. The police officers held Mr. Johnson. He was no longer shouting. He was just gasping, throwing a look at me that mixed hatred and desperation. The room fell into an eerie silence, broken only by Zola's sobs and Mrs. Johnson's heavy breathing. I didn't open the phone immediately. I knew that what it contained would not only expose Mr. Johnson, but would also be too great a shock for everyone present. I scanned the horrified relatives, Cairo kneeling like a soulless corpse, and Mrs. Johnson, now more miserable than a beggar. I opened my mouth. My voice was no longer cold but grave, loaded with profound sadness. None of us wanted things to come to this point, but the truth, no matter how painful, must be revealed. I unlocked the phone. The password was Zola's birthday. Incredibly simple. Proof of her total lack of caution. In the message inbox, a conversation with the contact adoptive father was pinned at the top. I opened it. Hundreds, thousands of messages spanning more than a year. They weren't the affectionate messages of a father to his daughter. They were words of love, dates, jealousy, and dirty calculations. "Zola, do you have time tonight? Dad will pick you up. Your mother went to the country club again. The dress you wore today was beautiful. I love it. Don't go out with that guy. Dad doesn't like him." And the most recent messages, the ones that chilled my blood. "Are you sure it's my child?" "Sure. I calculated the exact dates. It's impossible for it to be Cairo's." "Well done. You relax and take care. Dad will handle everything. I'll find a way for Cairo to accept it as his own. When we get rid of Celine, you'll be the lady of this house. All the assets will end up being for us and our child." So that was it. It was all a play within a play. Cairo and Zola's infidelity was actually a larger play directed by Mr. Johnson himself. He not only wanted an heir of his own blood, but he also wanted to use that child to legally seize my assets through his son. 2 birds with 1 stone, a conspiracy of incest and asset appropriation, perfectly concealed beneath the mask of a patriarchal family. I didn't read the messages aloud. I simply handed the phone in silence to the police officer next to me. "Officer, here is the proof." The officer took the phone and examined it. His face grew increasingly serious. He said something to his partner, and both approached Mr. Johnson. "Mr. Sterling Johnson, we have sufficient evidence to investigate you on charges of incest and conspiracy for the misappropriation of assets. You will have to accompany us to the station." 2 cold handcuffs snapped onto Mr. Johnson's wrists. The dry metallic click echoed in the room like a judge's gavel, sentencing the end of everything. Mr. Johnson no longer resisted. He simply stood there, with his head bowed. All his dignity and patriarchal air had shattered. As they let him out, passing Mrs. Johnson, she seemed to come back to her senses. She clung to her husband's arm, sobbing inconsolably. "Honey, say it's not true. Tell me Zola is lying." But Mr. Johnson didn't have the courage to look his wife in the eyes. He just remained silent. His silence was the most painful confession. Mrs. Johnson released his hand and collapsed onto the floor, crying without tears. The man she had lived with for decades, the man she had always respected and admired, was a demon in human skin. The heir she so longed for was the fruit of the sinful relationship between her husband and the daughter she had raised. There was no crueler truth, no greater humiliation. I observed the scene without feeling a single drop of satisfaction, only an infinite sadness, a family that, out of pure greed and selfishness, had sunk into an abyss of sin and destruction. I turned to look at Cairo. He was still kneeling there, his gaze lost in the void. He probably realized at that moment that he, too, had been a poor puppet in his father's play. He had lost everything: his wife, his mistress, the child he believed was his, and the father he had always respected. I didn't say anything else. I simply turned and left. Dr. Tate was waiting for me outside. He draped his jacket over my shoulders as if to hide the trembling I was trying to suppress. "Let's go, Celine. Is it all over now?" "Yes," I replied hoarsely. "It's truly over." I walked out of that house without looking back even once, leaving behind a broken family, leaving behind 5 years of my youth filled with pain. The sky outside was lightening. A new day was beginning, and I knew that my life, too, would move into a new chapter from today. Were you left in shock by the events you just witnessed? Celine's journey to claim justice has ended, but its consequences will undoubtedly endure. If this story resonated in your heart, don't hesitate to hit the share button so that the power of truth and courage reaches more people. The curtain fell with the tragic end of the Johnson family. The sound of police sirens faded into the distance, carrying Mr. Johnson and his sinful secret away. The luxury house, which moments before hosted a party, was plunged into an eerie silence, broken only by Mrs. Johnson's inconsolable crying and the sighs of resignation from those who remained. I didn't stay to witness the collapse. Dr. Tate took me away just after Mr. Johnson was let off. The car drove through familiar streets, but my mind was a whirlwind of mixed emotions. I felt relief, pain, and a strangely hollow emptiness. "What are you planning to do now?" Dr. Tate broke the silence. "I don't know," I replied, resting my head against the window. The streetlights passed like shooting stars. "I guess I'll need a lot of time to forget all this." "Don't try to forget, Celine," Dr. Tate said in a warm voice. "Face it. Learn to live with it and turn it into part of your strength. You have been very brave. You did something not everyone could do." I didn't reply. I just managed a faint smile. For the first time in a long time, I felt a little warmth in my frozen heart. Dr. Tate drove me to an extended stay hotel he had booked for me. "Stay here for a while, in silence. I'll take care of your work schedule at the hospital. Don't worry about anything. Just rest." I looked at him, feeling infinite gratitude. "How can I?" "There's nothing to thank me for," he smiled. "We are colleagues and friends. It's normal to help each other. Besides, I've learned a lot from you about strength and fortitude." In the following days, I lived in absolute silence. I cut off contact with everyone. I didn't read newspapers or social media. I needed time for myself, to put the pieces of my soul back together. The Johnson family case became a scandal that rocked society. The media constantly reported, dissecting every aspect of the story. They painted a dramatic picture of a renowned family, rotten from within, full of incest, fraud, and betrayal. My name was also constantly mentioned, but with a completely different image. They called me the Iron Wife, the Rose with Thorns, a symbol of the woman who rises against injustice. But those titles didn't interest me. The only thing that mattered to me now was my future. Where to go? Where to return? Should I continue practicing medicine? Thousands of unanswered questions. A week later, my lawyer came. He brought good news. Dr. Calloway, Mr. Johnson has accepted the divorce on the terms we proposed. He waives all rights to the condo and other assets. Furthermore, he will pay a considerable sum as compensation for emotional damages. Why did he accept so easily? I was surprised. Because he had no other option, the lawyer explained. After his father's arrest, his family has collapsed. His mother is admitted to a psychiatric facility from the shock, and the family business is on the brink of bankruptcy. He has neither the spirit nor the money to continue with litigation. Besides, with the evidence we have, he would certainly lose in court. Thus, my marriage ended quickly and cleanly on paper. But the wounds on my heart would probably never fully heal. At the same time, I also received news about Zola. After everything came to light, she went to live with a distant aunt. I didn't know what decision she would make about the child she was expecting, and I didn't want to know. Her life no longer had anything to do with mine. Time flew by. 1 month, 2, half a year. Slowly, I regained my balance. I returned to work at the hospital. The emergencies, the lives hanging by a thread, made me realize that my pain, no matter how great, was just a grain of sand in the desert of life. There were people much more unfortunate than I was, and there were more meaningful things to do than to remain anchored in the past. I threw myself into work as a form of healing. I participated in training courses to improve my specialty. I took charge of the most difficult and complex cases. My dedication and talent were recognized. Soon after, I was promoted to Assistant Chief of Emergency Services. My life gradually entered a new orbit. A life without Cairo, without in-laws, without deception or calculation, just work, good colleagues, and peaceful days. Sometimes I thought of Cairo, but not with love or hatred, but as one remembers a stranger who has passed through one's life. I learned that after the divorce and the family's bankruptcy, he had to sell the house and the SUV to pay debts. He started over from scratch, with a tough and difficult life. That was his price for his cowardice and betrayal, and I found peace. But sometimes, in the deep, silent nights, when I faced the darkness and loneliness, I wondered if I could ever love again. Could my heart, once broken into 1,000 pieces, beat again? There was no answer. Perhaps I needed more time, but one thing was clear. If another man entered my life, he had to be completely different. He didn't need to be rich or handsome. He just needed to have one thing Cairo never had: a sincere heart. 2 years after that storm ravaged my life, it truly opened a new chapter. I was no longer Dr. Celine Calloway with sad eyes and a forced smile. I had learned to laugh again, a genuine laugh born from inner peace. My job as Assistant Chief of Emergency Services was very demanding, but it brought me joy and meaning. Every patient I saved made my life feel more valuable. Through my pain, I had learned to understand and share the pain of others. I no longer lived in the extended stay hotel. With the compensation money and my savings, I bought a small, beautiful condo with a sunny balcony in the Buckhead area. It was my true home, a haven of peace to which I could return every day after hard work. I made new friends, established new relationships, joined a book club and yoga classes. I learned to love and take care of myself more, both physically and mentally. Sometimes, through former colleagues or gossip, news of the Johnson family reached me. Mrs. Johnson, after receiving psychiatric treatment, had returned to her old bungalow, where she lived in silence. Nothing remained of her former image of power and sharpness. Only a lonely old woman. Mr. Johnson received a sentence commensurate with his crimes, and Cairo was still struggling to make a living. Someone said they had seen him working as a delivery driver, another as a concierge in a building. He had to pay for his mistakes with the rest of his life. I no longer cared about them. The past was truly behind me. I had forgiven, not for them, but for myself, to stop carrying the weight of hatred, to live a light and serene life. And then, one beautiful weekend afternoon, something unexpected happened. I was in a bookstore, picking out some new medical texts, when I heard a deep, warm voice beside me. "Dr. Calloway, what a coincidence to find you here." I turned, a little surprised. It was Dr. Sterling Tate. Instead of his white coat, he was wearing a simple shirt and jeans. He looked much younger and more relaxed than at the hospital. "Hello, doctor," I smiled. "It's a small world." "Do you enjoy reading?" he asked, pointing to the books I was holding. "Yes, it's been a habit since I was a child." We started talking, not about work or patients, but about books, music, and common hobbies. I was surprised to discover that he was not only an excellent doctor and a respected chief, but also a very interesting man with deep knowledge and a delicate sensitivity. The conversation lasted longer than expected. When we left the bookstore, the sky was already getting dark. "May I buy you a coffee?" he suggested with a somewhat shy look. I hesitated for a moment. It was the first time in a long time I had been alone with a man. My heart seemed to have frozen after that storm. But seeing his sincere and warm gaze, I nodded silently. "Yes, of course." We sat in a small coffee shop with a bougainvillea vine. The light of the sunset filtered through the leaves, creating a romantic scene. He talked to me about his family, his dreams of youth, and the pressure of being a doctor. I, for the first time, opened up and shared my thoughts and plans with him. Between us, there was no awkwardness or the distance of boss/employee, only the complicity of two souls who had been through a lot. As we said goodbye, he walked me to the parking lot. "Celine," he said, calling me by my first name, no longer Dr. Calloway. "I know it might be too soon, but would you give me the opportunity to get to know you better?" His sudden confession made my heart race. I was speechless, unsure what to answer. I was afraid of being hurt again. But then I remembered my mother's words. "Don't close your heart because of people who aren't worth it." I raised my head and looked at him, at his eyes full of anticipation and hope. "I need time," I replied. "I'll wait," he said without hesitation. "I'll wait until you're ready." He didn't try to take my hand or add any flowery words. He simply stood there, looking at me with respect and patience. His gentleness sincerely moved me. I drove home feeling a strange and warm emotion filling my heart. Maybe happiness hadn't completely abandoned me. Maybe after the storm came the calm. And maybe it was time to give myself the opportunity to be loved again. One door had closed, but another was opening wide. And I knew that behind that door, a good man was waiting for me. Has Celine's journey to regain happiness restored your faith in good days after the storm? If this story has brought you faith and hope, don't hesitate to leave a meaningful comment to express your emotions. Every word of encouragement will be a flower sent to strong women like Celine. The relationship between Dr. Tate and me didn't develop hastily. It was like a small stream, flowing softly and naturally into my life. He didn't give me expensive gifts or ostentatious bouquets of flowers. He simply stayed by my side in silence, taking care of me with the smallest gestures: a hot cup of coffee in the morning after an exhausting night shift, a good book he knew I would like, or simply a message of encouragement at the right time. He never asked me about my past, but I knew he understood everything. He respected my pain and gave me space to heal on my own. His gentleness and patience slowly melted the ice in my heart. I started to open up more, to share more of my thoughts and dreams with him, and I realized that by his side, I always felt at peace. I could be myself. A year after our reunion at the bookstore, on a warm winter evening, he took me to a small restaurant on a rooftop in Midtown Atlanta. From there, the entire city was lit up. Under the romantic candlelight, he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. He didn't kneel or utter grandiloquent words. He simply looked into my eyes and said with a grave and sincere voice, "Celine, in this last year, I've learned a lot from you about strength, tolerance, and the will to live. You have made me believe that after the rain, not only does the sun come out, but so does the rainbow. Would you look for other rainbows with me for the rest of our lives?" He opened the box, and inside was a simple yet exquisite platinum ring. It didn't have a large diamond, only a small blue sapphire that shone like a star. "I know you don't like flashy things," he said. "This stone is like your eyes, always clear, firm, and with an invisible strength." I looked at him, and tears of happiness kept flowing. There was no longer any doubt or fear. I knew this was the man I was looking for, a man who loved me for who I was, not for who I was or what I had. "Yes, I do," I whispered, swallowing my tears. He placed the ring on my finger, and a current of warmth flowed through my entire body. We didn't have a big wedding. Our wedding was on a secluded beach with only our best friends as witnesses. I wore a simple white wedding dress, and holding his hand, I walked across the white sand. The waves crashed, and the sea breeze blew softly. Everything seemed to bless us. That day, I truly believed that happiness existed. After getting married, we decided to carry out a project we had been thinking about for a long time. We created a small charitable foundation called Hope's Harbor to help pay for surgeries for poor patients with rare diseases. We wanted to use our professionalism and our luck to bring life and hope to people less fortunate than us. My life was now full of meaning and joy. I not only had a wonderful husband and a meaningful job, but also a true family. Dr. Tate's parents were very kind and thoughtful people. They loved me like a daughter, filling all the emotional deficiencies I had suffered. Sometimes I think about my story, about the dark days past. The pain is still there like a faint scar that will never disappear, but it no longer hurts. I am grateful to the past because that past has turned me into the person I am today. A stronger, more mature Celine who values happiness more. And I want to send a message to all the women who have faced, are facing, or will face the storms of life. Never give up. Never lose hope. Believe that after every storm, the sun will rise again. And somewhere, a good man, a true happiness, will always be waiting for you. Only if you have the courage to walk through the darkness and embrace the light. Dear listeners, the story of Dr. Celine Calloway comes to an end with a truly satisfying and meaningful conclusion. Her journey from betrayed wife to a symbol of strength and humanity shows us that true happiness does not come from luck, but from our own choices and efforts. If this story has reached your hearts, please support us with a like, share, and subscribe. Every small gesture from you is a great boost for us to continue creating more good and meaningful stories. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.